It is my esteemed honor to welcome our morning keynote, a dear friend, my former boss, Glenn Hegar. When I think of Comptroller Hegar, I think of his three priorities: faith, family, and the great state of Texas. He is our CFO that is responsible for guarding our state's coffers, and apparently he does a really good job because we've got $32 billion extra. But he also advocates for the responsible funding of things that matter to the state, including water infrastructure and workforce. Fun fact about the Comptroller: in his early days in the legislature, he would have to leave during session to go help his family farm with harvest. He is the real deal, a great human, and a dear friend, and I am very proud to welcome him. So let's give him a warm round of applause, y'all.
Thank you, Madam Chair. When she said when I would leave the legislature and head back home to help with the family farm, so those of you that don't know, I'm a sixth-generation Texan. I grew up on a family farming operation. Highway 290, if you ever go towards Houston or you go out of Houston, it used to be a really long way from Houston, but it's not so far anymore, because if you haven't noticed, every morning when you wake up, we have another 1,000 people that call Texas home every single day. So I challenge people when I give a speech, really think about that every single day when you wake up. There's another 1,000 people that call Texas home every single day. Now, of course, that's half of that is natural growth, half of that are people that move to the state of Texas, and so therefore as Texas grows, it depends on the region that you're in. But kind of backtrack to when I got into this role, I used to send an email to my staff every single month. I still do it every quarter, and so I just talk a little bit about what's going on in the agency, what's going on in the state, a little bit about what's going on back at the family home life with my 3 kids. If nothing else, pray for me. I have 3 teenagers, so I need lots of prayers. When I say that, I just sometimes when I say that, I think about my oldest daughter, who's a senior in high school, is almost 18, and the twins are almost 15. And I remember that time when I held my oldest daughter and I looked at her. You know, when anybody in the room that you have a child, you hold that first one, you look at them, you go, oh my gosh, they're such an angel. And then they become a teenager, and you know that angel has disappeared and probably never coming back. So pray for me. I got 3 of them. But back to the story, I used to always write something about the staff and I, talk about what's going on. And one day as I was writing, and Brooke made me think about this, sorry, I get distracted and I go off, and I'll come back and talk about what I'm supposed to. Just give me a second. But fact is, I told the legislature, my staff, I said, I'm the 36th Comptroller of Public Accounts, and I think that I'm probably the first truck driver that's ever been elected to statewide office or held the office of the Comptroller. And you go, well, what do you mean? Because when we'd harvest, you'd have to drive the grain to and from the elevator. So Glenn, that was part of one of the many hats that I wore, was a truck driver. So, it's not just in other states. You got the truck driver up here today, so you're going to learn from him. But let's talk a little bit about, 1, the economy, 2nd, water. One of the things in my role that I talk about all the time is, as Texas grows, trying to make sure that we continue to invest in the infrastructure of Texas. When I gave the biennial revenue estimate just a few weeks ago, when I have spoken in a lot of different venues and formats, talking about the historical, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that the Texas legislature has this legislative session. Every session is different. It has a personality. It's unique in some form or some way. As I was preparing for this revenue estimate, I was trying to think to talk about some of the numbers, the top lines that people need to remember and take away, but also, what is the story that I want people to come away with? You almost have to tell people a story so they can kind of figure out, how did we get to where we're at, where are we at, and where are we going? What's going to happen? And one of the points that I started using when I gave a speech here in Austin one time, I said, when I lay out the revenue estimate, and I'm not going to tell you that number today, I'm going to wait another month before the job I do it the day before legislative session. One of the things is, when you hear it, you're going to go, wow. And I use that wow several times in the speech. Other phrases that I would use is once in a lifetime, historical. And the one thing the legislature has to do is a 2-year budget. But as I talk about that wow, that once in a lifetime, that historical, people would ask this time, Glenn, well, what do they do? And one of the things that I think is so fundamental, regardless of whether you're a state that is growing in population like Texas, or Texas continues to attract businesses that either want to move their corporation here, they want to set up a new shop, or they want to create a new business, Texas is kind of that economic opportunity. I mean, people ask me, well, why do people move here? And I tell them it's the same reason that my family did in the 1840s. They moved here. Why? For an economic opportunity. They come here for an economic opportunity for them, that generation, and for future generations. And that's the same reason that people are coming here today. But you're only going to have that economic opportunity if you have what? Infrastructure. I tell people, I got out on a tour earlier last year. Sorry, I'm switching into 2023. It's hard to remember the months sometimes. Last year in the fall, when I got in this role, I decided to do a tour of Texas. We went to almost 40 cities across the state. We crammed it into a couple of months after legislative session. And oh, by the way, trying to do the normal job of this role, also trying to be a good husband, a father to 3 kids. I sat down with my staff after roughly a 40-city tour in about 2 months, and I looked at them and I said, I don't know whose idea it was to go on a 40-city tour, but whose ever idea, that was stupid. And they all looked at me wanting to go, it was yours. And they didn't say a word. And then I chuckled and I laughed. I go, yes, I know whose idea it was. So let's just say if Glenn ever has that idea again, just say, I think a shorter tour is better. So, in other words, then we decided to start talking about different issues that are important to the state of Texas, different industries that are important to the state of Texas, but still try to travel around on a 6, 7, 8 stop across the state. And last year, 2 years ago almost, I told my staff, I said, let's talk about water. While water is not something that we engage in my agency, is my constitutional duties, that's the Texas Water Development Board. But the fact is, it is something that's important to this state, that every morning when people wake up, as you know, you deal in this world, but most people, 30 million people across the state of Texas, people in the nation, people around the world, they wake up, they turn on the water. That's one of the first things they do in the morning. I remember when I was in the legislature in 2003, yes, that was a long time ago, it was a very different session than the one we have this cycle. We actually entered in with a $10 billion shortfall. $10 billion shortfall. We were trying to figure out how to manage those resources. I was a new member of the legislature. I was trying to preserve some funding for a water issue that I thought was important. It wasn't necessarily as important to my district, but I thought it was important to the state of Texas. There was a legislator at the front who was trying to pull that money out, spend it somewhere else. I decided to get on the back mic. I told them that it's important. We have to have this. What is the one thing that we have to sustain us in life? I thought, as a recovering lawyer, it was a simple question. Deserved a simple answer. And he avoided my question. So I decided to ask again. And I asked again. I think I asked about 4 times. Finally, the member looked at me. I said again, what is that one thing that we have to sustain us? What is that one thing that we have to have? And they looked at me and said, it's love. That is a true story. Needless to say, I was a little stumped. I wasn't sure what to say. I was pausing. The wheels were turning in my head. And I said, okay, love is important. I agree with that. But other than that, what do we have that we drink, that we do this, that we do that? And then they kind of smiled and finally said, okay. They said water. Well, I laughed. We all went home a few days. Our districts came back the next week. Sunday morning, I was up here Monday morning, whatever it was. And on my desk, I still have it in my desk at the controller's office, pull open the door, there's a bookmarker. And that bookmarker does not say water on it, it says love. But it reminds me of that debate, it reminds me of that discussion, that while the member knew where I was going, they wanted to pivot, but you can't pivot, you have to come back to it. That's the point, is that in fact we have to have it. So when I laid out the revenue estimate, when I laid out the wow, when I laid out the astonishing, the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity of $33 billion cash carry over balance from this current 2-year budget cycle to the next one. An astonishing number. I was reading about a month ago I read a lot. I read lots of news articles, clippings my staff sends, different things that I look at. And there was the headline that Saudi Arabia was announcing that they had a $27 billion cash carryover balance. And I was like, yeah, whatever. So I sent it to my staff. I said, you at least got to put it out. We're not going to say the number, but we're going to say, yeah, well, lucky for you, but you're not Texas. Now, how did we get here in part? We got here in part because, wow, that word wow is in a lot of things that we've been through in the last couple of years. You know, if we were talking several years ago at the pandemic here in another month and a half, when businesses shut down, people started working from home, people were wearing us out, what's going to happen, where's the economy going, what do you think? We didn't have good data like everybody else. And so we kept saying, we need a couple months of data, we need a couple of data points. We started looking at all these actual indicators we could see in real life, and we felt like the economy was going to contract, and it did. Now, what we nor the rest of the world really anticipated, or here in the United States especially, is how quick that recovery was going to be. And then as we adjusted our revenue estimate, and as we adjusted again, and as I've continued to watch, the economy in Texas in the last 18 months has been nothing other than absolutely astonishing. And when I say that, please understand, that's for 254 counties, that's for 12 economic regions, that's for the 9th largest economy in the world. As an overall, there are some industry sectors that are not doing as well. There are some regions that are not doing as well. Back to the tour that I took last fall was on what issue? Was water. When I told my staff 2 years ago we need to talk about water, little did I know that we were going to have a significant drought last year. Which, if you're going to talk about water, as we all know in this room, that's the best time to talk about it. Because it is front and center on everybody's minds. It's not just in the agriculture community, it's not just in industry sectors, it's not just in manufacturing, it's in suburban, urban areas. So we got out and we talked about all kinds of different issues that are important in this field, in this area. Infrastructure, but that infrastructure of whether we are dealing with aquifers, we're dealing with rivers, whether we're dealing with surface storage, groundwater, brackish water, underground storage, whether we're dealing with flood control. All these issues are extremely important, and they take money, planning, and we have to make sure that we continue planning. I am proud of what Texas has done over the course of the last decade plus, whether it was taking $2 billion out of the Economic Stabilization Fund, moving it over for my office to manage until Water Development Board asked to bring those dollars down in the SWIFT. I am proud of some of the evergreen capabilities that we have given the Texas Water Development Board and Bonding Authority. Several years ago when I was chairing Sunset, we didn't just say, oh, we'll renew it for a few years. We want to renew it and make it evergreen. So these tools are important because other states around this nation were saying, don't go to Texas because they don't have enough water. Well, in fact, we've done a lot of planning since then. But when I laid out that revenue estimate, I talked about infrastructure, whether it's water, it's roads, it's broadband internet connectivity. When we all left and went back to our homes, our kids came home, whatever situation you were in during the pandemic, what is that one thing that everybody had to have, whether it was to do education, whether it was to do your job, whether it was for a business, whether it was for attending church, you have to have connectivity. The legislature put me in charge last cycle of trying to work with the private sector and those providers to how do we incentivize and get that additional connectivity, because it is shocking. We got 7 million people in this state that has no broadband capability in and of their residence. So the infrastructure needs of the state are immense, is my point. And we have to continue to focus on that, and water is one of them. Yes, we have infrastructure funding that is coming to the state of Texas. We have dollars that are moving from the infrastructure bill. But oh, by the way, one of the things that I have made the point over and over and over, while the revenues in the state treasury over the course of the last 18 months has been nothing other than astonishing, whether it's sales tax dollars, which is 60% of all the money that we collect in taxes, whether it's severance tax dollars that either stay in the general treasury, move over to our economic stabilization fund, or move over to fund transportation funding. Those revenues or other revenues, all revenue streams but one have actually been higher. And they've all grown immensely. But one of the points that I have continued to make over and over and over again, that unfortunately, if you have noticed, in your own personal household, in your own business, or wherever you work in, there's a word that has caused things to go up more and more, and it's called inflation. We've had 40-year historical inflation. I was trying to think, how do you put this in perspective? So I was asking my team to put a few numbers together as we were working through the revenue estimate, and one of the points that I've made, and I knew it was high, but it really kind of knocked me over when they gave me the numbers, that just in sales tax items that we purchase, you, me, individuals, and businesses, and when I say sales tax items, that doesn't include food. That doesn't include medication, because those are not sales tax applicable. Only sales tax applicable items, you, me, individuals in this room, across this state, businesses in this state, in the last month, and the month before that, and the month before that in the last quarter, every month people have paid about $4.5 billion more a month than they did for the exact same items a year ago. To put that in perspective, in the last 12 months, that's $45 billion extra that people have spent in this state for those items. Why do I bring that up? I don't know if you've noted, infrastructure costs have risen. And so while we have dollars that we are putting into the system, the fact is they cost more, and that's why I felt like it was important. It's continuing to be important. As the one that oversees the money comes in the treasury to kind of give a little direction in the legislature realm, is that we have to continue to make sure we invest in infrastructure with the growth of the state. We have to make sure that we continue to recognize that products and things cost more than what they did before. Now, one of the things that made this revenue estimate harder than any that I've ever given before. You go, well, how hard can it be? I mean, you're showing up like the Santa Claus of all Santa Clauses. You got bags of money that you are bringing to the legislative table. You're probably the most popular person in Austin, around the state. I am a little more popular than I used to be, I will admit. It is better to do my job in times of surplus than times of deficit. I have learned that in the last 3 years. It's better to give good news than during the pandemic to say, oh, by the way, we all need to tighten our belts because actually revenues are going to plunge and we're probably going to be in a deficit this biennium. It is better to be in this job. However, with that being said, the reason it is difficult is because we are also saying that this biennium, this fiscal year, later this year, that we think Texas, like the rest of the nation, the rest of the world, will have, unfortunately, that word recession. We think with the Fed policies, the demands that we all have for employees, the lack of employees, the great retirement that we've seen in the last several years, those forces, supply chains around the rest of the world continuing to be broken to some degree and not quite put back together. All of these different factors means that, unfortunately, we're going to have somewhat of a slowdown in Texas and the nation. But when I say that, understand we think it's going to be very mild. We think it's going to be very short. And so, therefore, the growth that we're going to have will continue to outpace the national average, just a little bit slower than what we've had in the past. So that's a hard message to say, that you have these historical revenues, this historical opportunity, but oh, by the way, the next year we will have a mild recession later this year. And I was thinking about, how do I kind of frame that sometimes you just don't know what's on the horizon. So I was thinking when I was speaking one day, and I like to tell stories. I like to tell stories about kids, because, I mean, who doesn't like kids? Well, you said yours are teenagers. Yeah, I know, it's a little different. But anyway, they're still wonderful kids. And I was thinking about a couple of times that I've told my kids over the last few years where we live west of Houston, Katy, It's where we call home, even though I spend a lot of time here and traveling. That's where we still call home. I grew up in the area. My wife grew up in the area. Our families are there, our support network, so I go back and forth. So we back up to a tributary of Buffalo Bayou. 5 years ago plus, Hurricane Harvey, after it hit Port A, the Gulf Coast, Houston, went over to Beaumont, Port Arthur area, massive flooding across great parts of the state of Texas. We back up to a pipeline, we back up to a creek, part of Buffalo Bayou, and the back of our yard literally was a roaring river. The kids are peering through the windows, they're looking at it. We're not going to flood, but we know other people. You see the stories on TV. We're dealing and talking to people and trying to help manage through the issue like everybody is. And I told my kids, what you were seeing is a once-in-a-lifetime event. Then we had a thing called the pandemic. We were here in Austin because the kids were on spring break. We were at the Bullock Museum going back to my office. We were told the neighboring school was closed. Our school was closed. We were moving our staff the following Monday to telework. All these things were happening so fast. We're talking on the way home the next few days, and I told the kids, this has not happened in 100 years. This is a once-in-a-lifetime event. Then we had Winter Storm Uri. Devastating cold event across the entire state of Texas. All of the state of Texas was not just hit with this terrible cold polar vortex, but in fact, we had all the rain, precipitation that came with it. Thankfully, the storm that we had there weeks ago, we didn't have all the precipitation. We didn't have the same issues we did. My kids, we woke up like so many people. We had no electricity. Everybody's by the little bitty fireplace that doesn't put out that much heat. I said, we're going to go take y'all to a friend's house. He does emergency management for an oil and gas company. He's Mr. Prepared for everything. They got a natural gas generator. But I'm coming home, but y'all get to go over there. And my kids asked a question. My son said, well, Dad, why don't we have a natural gas generator? It's a great question, Jonah. Dad grew up on a farm. That's one less thing to keep up with. You have to have a lot of moving pieces, mechanical pieces on a farm. There's all this upkeep. That's one less thing that I don't have to do. And by the way, Jonah, this is a once-in-a-lifetime event. True story. 2 years ago, he looked at me a few weeks short of becoming 13. And my son said, Dad, how many once-in-a-lifetime events do I have to live through? And that's when it hit me, just cold as could be across my face. It hit me that I am using that phrase, once in a lifetime, way too much. And then it also hit me simultaneously that, oh my God, have we lived through truly a lot of once-in-a-lifetime events? So I debated for quite a while, should I use that phrase anymore? And I thought, you know what, hell, let's just roll the dice. And I'm going to use it in my revenue estimate one more time. Now, I'm using it still because truly, $33 billion cash carryover balance. While Texas is having a mild recession, so we think, later this year, the fact is the cash carryover balance plus the growth in the biennium for the next 2 years is truly astonishing. The growth in the budget, as one former budget person came up to me the other day during some of the inauguration stuff and just said, do you know how much money they really have? And I thought, well, duh. Yeah, I do. Do you? And that person said, oh my gosh. And I said, yeah, why do you think I've been saying, wow, astonishing, once in a lifetime? But when I say all this, here's part of the point. People always ask me, say, Glenn Hegar, can you tell me what is the price of oil in your revenue estimate? I can tell them the price. I can tell them what we factor in for whether there's growth or not, production coming out of the ground. The two components are equally important. Severance taxes on natural gas, I can tell you that. But I always remind, and I'm going to probably say this when I go to the Senate Finance next week and talk about the revenue estimate. I'll do it next month when I go to the House Appropriations after they get committee assignments and a few other locations. And I always get that question. And I say, I can tell you the number we use. We're confident in the number we use. But let me also tell you, I try to look at the NYMEC futures, the 12-month futures. So let's just use December of this year.
that right now the market, the people that deal in this every single day, the people that trade, they are the experts. They're the ones that know. So I'm going to go off the people of knowledge. That's what I'm going to look at. Glenn Hegar, my team looks at a lot of things, but I'm going to look at that one. There's 95% certainty the price of WTI, West Texas Intermediate, come this December, 95%. How much more certain can you get from the experts than that? They expect it'll be between $23 and about $187 a barrel. So I think that if we're somewhere between 23 and 187, we're pretty damn good. The point I say to that story, the point that I have been using for a while about Jonah's question, Dad, how many once-in-a-lifetime events do I have to live through, is that while we feel pretty confident and pretty certain with the estimate that we've given the legislature, you're talking about a revenue forecast that doesn't start for 9 months. It starts September 1, and it goes for the next 2 years. And by the way, this is one of the most dynamic economies, not just in the United States, one of the most dynamic economies in the entire world. We have more growth than in the time that I have been in this role in 12 years. We have moved from the 12th largest economy to the 11th to the 10th, and now we're the 9th largest economy. The growth in Texas has been immense. But if we're going to keep up with that growth, we have to continue to invest in a word called infrastructure. And a sub-part of that infrastructure is making sure that when people turn on the tap, they have it. And that's not just in residences, that's in business, that's in agriculture. And people always ask me about the ag industry because I grew up in it. That's still part of my life, still part of my family's life. Something that we're very proud of and has taught me a hard work ethic. And people always want to know, what does that industry sector provide to the state economy? And I turn the question slightly because I remind them, what is one of the first things that you do every single day after you brush your teeth? You eat. And you usually do it 3 times a day, and you have some snacks in between. So regardless of how much economic output it provides to the state, it's pretty darn important. And so we're going to have to make sure that we manage all of those industry sectors if we're going to continue to have a thriving economy in the state of Texas. And I continue to emphasize to the legislature, one of those is what you're here to talk about, is water. And I don't know about you, I prayed really hard for the last 10 days, and I prayed that today, of all days, we would have rain. So, I'm not saying I had anything to do with it, but I'm just saying you asked, and by God, Glenn Hegar tries to deliver. So, God bless y'all. See y'all, and have a great day.